We typically think of our passions as interests to pursue outside of the workplace. However, innovative leaders understand that these passions are what help motivate and drive us and our teams, and look for ways to tap into that enthusiasm to achieve professional success. Today, we're going to take a look at how professionals at all levels can align what inspires them with organizational goals, plus how to get others on board with their passion projects. Join us to discover how you can turn your social improvement projects into corporate initiatives. Welcome to the Women's Leadership Today podcast, a feature of Women's Leadership Today. I'm your host, Michelle Myers. Today, I'd like to welcome Bessi Graham. Bessi is an award-winning entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience working with business owners, governments, and large funding bodies to bring doing good and making money together. From the grassroots of sitting in the dirt working with business owners in the Pacific Islands to the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, Bessi has seen it all and brings an unparalleled perspective on what makes change happen. Bessi, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Bessi, can you tell us about your experience and how you started on this path to marrying these ideas of doing good with organizations also being able to make money?
Sure. It's an interesting one because I think, like many people, I was someone who didn't really want to be boxed or have to pick one thing. I loved certain aspects of business, and then I was someone who was always fascinated with leadership. So I studied politics, counterterrorism, international relations.
Oh, wow.
And so I had this sort of interest in what was the role of government. I was interested in business and had been brought up in a house where we were very focused on social justice and how do you have perspective and understand how fortunate you are within the context where we were born to compare yourself instead of to the people around you, to the bulk of the population of the world, and then realize, to whom much is given, much is expected. What is your contribution going to be? So I had these swirling passions or interests, if you like. And really, when I look back, particularly over the last sort of 23, 24 years, there's always been this desire or journey to weave those things together. How do I use the power of business? Because I passionately believe it can play an incredible role in making the world a better place. How do I use that, but in a much broader context that is thinking about the flow-on impacts of the decisions we make in business and how that has an impact positively on either people or the planet. And then within those systems, what is the role of government? So I've always looked at wanting to jump between, I say to the people that I work with, the business leaders I work with, you need to think like a system, but act like an entrepreneur. And that's sort of what I've been doing over my career, is the big zoom out to understand the big picture, where the opportunities and gaps are in a system, but then drill down to be practical and not just have a theoretical conversation, but say, what could we do as business leaders to actually make a difference here? So that's sort of been the journey with that common theme throughout all the businesses I've built and worked with, being around how do we awaken that possibility for business leaders of doing good and making money in the same business model. So that's the common theme across it all.
And how receptive have you found organizations to be when you present these ideas?
So it's interesting because I do think, if we look back, particularly since the 70s, so there's a concept for us that we feel like there is a definition of what is the purpose of business. And yet if we actually look historically, the views around business being solely for profit maximization or shareholder value maximization only came in the 70s. That's not a long-held human concept of what the role of business is. And so in terms of the receptivity, it is interesting because whether someone is deeply passionate about business and is coming at that from more of a one-dimensional approach to say it's about profit maximization, or if they're on the other side of the extreme and they're actually really uncomfortable with business and profit and they're trying to make a difference in the world and they see themselves in the charitable or philanthropic space, people do tend to fall to one extreme or the other. And there is a discomfort with bringing these ideas back together. For a lot of people, it's just not how they have thought or approached things. And so the work that I do with people really comes down to that mindset shift, the starting point being an acknowledgement of actually realizing what are those beliefs you've taken on unconsciously, where you feel like you have to choose one. Oh, am I running a business or am I running a charity? Am I here to make money or to do good? Once a leader can realize some of those unconscious things, what I have found in terms of how they then respond is there's actually a really great sense of relief. Because if you think about yourself and your friends and people you know, it's actually far more satisfying to be able to bring all that you care about and all of who you are into the work you do. Yeah. So once people get over that original little speed bump, if you like, of the unconscious beliefs they've taken on about doing good and making money, then I find that it's actually a really exciting place because they see, oh, you're not asking me to downplay the importance of my business or to be ashamed of wanting to build a strong, profitable business. That's great. But you're wanting me to be able to add in these other elements of who I am and what I care about. And I think that's really important.
And why do you think we have seen this separation of these two ideas and people are so uncomfortable with that initially?
In many respects, the more complex and the faster paced the world has become, it is quite overwhelming. And if you think about how much information can our human brains take in at any given moment, we are all being bombarded with a speed of change that we have to adapt to that is pretty intense. Mm-hmm. And the more senior you are and the more responsibility you have so many layers of decisions to make every day, and all of these weighing up which priority do I, bring to the front today, and what am I going to have to compromise on or push to the side. So I think part of the reason why this quite one-dimensional approach of thinking has taken hold is because it's actually almost a relief to have something that you don't need to. It's like, nope, it's black and white. I don't need to deal with the complexity or nuance of that. So I do think that there is an element that it feels easier to not take into account learning to sit in what can feel like that blurry space in the middle where you're saying, two things that seem like a contradiction can be equally true. That takes some getting used to. So I think that's why it's probably taken hold so strongly. There's also then some aspects that are around the fact that for certain people who have had privilege or position and power, it has become in their best interests to keep it that way. And so there are power dynamics at play in that as well that come out. But I think that if we look at where are we at now, the world is a very different place now than it was in the 70s when these things first took hold.
Yeah.
The reality is that thinking it is the easier option to separate those two worlds is actually not really an option for you anymore. And so my work is about trying to help business leaders realize that it's not just that you want to do good because it's a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. I want anyone listening to be starting to shift into thinking, how does this become my core strategy that actually has competitive advantages connected to it? Because we now live in a world where there are external pressures from all kinds of stakeholders, whether that's investors, regulatory bodies, your customers, your employees. expectations have shifted of what we have to actually be able to demonstrate as businesses. So if you get ahead of that, then what I have found is you're actually able to really strengthen your business, because the ultimate win-win here is take on this mindset so that you can build a stronger business and also be able to contribute more. We're wanting both of those things. We're not demonizing one and prioritizing the other.
Well, I like what you're saying about it, sort of a mind shift in a way. And what are ways that we as individuals can make more room in our professional lives to incorporate what we're passionate about outside of the workplace?
I think it comes down to that same piece around mindset and looking for a win-win. When you go back to the way we've typically operated when we saw doing good as being something that was separate to our business life or our career, and what I mean by that is often it was enabled by it. So as an individual, it might be that by having a really good job, you were able to be generous because you had more income in your household. So that's enabled by your work, but we still saw the ability to be generous or contribute as something we did with the money after we made it. The opportunity for us as individuals in that place that you're speaking of, how do we bring that in, is to get really clear on what it is you care about, what you want to contribute to, but then realize that you are going to be set up more powerfully in the interaction with the organization you work with if you find out how can you connect those things you want to be doing to the company's strategy, to their priorities and focus areas. Because if we keep them disconnected, it will always be a token thing or a small piece, a little project that might happen once a year and stay quite grassroots. The strategic opportunity for individuals, particularly when you think about it in relation to how does it also create opportunities for you in the progression of your career or the learning to be a better leader yourself, it is that connection point of saying, I'm going to look clearly at what we as an organization are focused on. For example, many organizations are now having to be better able to actually demonstrate when they say that they care about or have core values around diversity and inclusion or equity. How are they actually demonstrating that in their behavior or their practices? So you might look at some of the language that's being used in your company and say, I'm really passionate about getting more women on boards as directors. And so I'm going to suggest that one of the professional development pieces that we do as an organisation identifies women who are wanting that opportunity, and I will put my effort into supporting our company train and equip those women to get those positions. How do I do that but always be tying it back to when I am pitching to my manager or to the board or executive? I'm laying out, we've identified that by 2025, we want to have 30% of women in these roles. Here's a great strategy of how we could achieve that. So I think what we're not trying to do is convince our boss or our executive that they should care about what we care about and help us support it. It's about us being strategic and figuring out what are the connection points between things I care about and goals or strategies that are identified by the organisation.
Well, and that's a good point. How can we bring our outside interests and projects into our work in a way that supports organizational goals?
Well, I think it is that the first step is the realisation that you need to connect the two. Previously, a lot of this type of work was done in a separate department. So you would have a corporate social responsibility team, or you would have a foundation at an organisation. And whenever you brought up a project that was about either giving time as employees to causes or collectively putting money or resources to a project, it was pushed off into a particular department that was doing the forward-facing pieces that are almost versions of PR for a company. The connection point of what you're talking about, and the way that I think as an employee people can start to feel more excited by what they can actually be part of creating is to not position the work that you're suggesting, whether it's a project or an ongoing piece of work, not to be pitching it as something that is off as a donation or distinct from what the company is trying to achieve. As I said, organizations are under so much pressure to demonstrate more consistently now the pieces that they are laying out publicly that they're focused on. And so if you can come to a really busy manager or executive team and make their job easier, that's how you should present things. And I think that piece is important, to not spend, if you get 10 minutes to pitch an idea, don't spend 8 minutes of it describing the problem that you're trying to fix. Get very quickly to the pain point that the organization has or the gain they're looking to achieve in the market, and connect those ideas, because you will get traction far quicker and in much more meaningful ways when your ideas are connected to the strategy. And as you know, we mentioned before, it also is a smart way to actually start to stand out in the way you think and in demonstrating how clear you are on the organizational strategy, and that you're here to try to make the organization win as well, not just pushing your own agenda. So it's always that, if we come back to at the beginning and the introduction, I'm trying to get people to adopt a both and mindset. So you're not wanting to go in with this either or option saying, this is a really lovely project and I care about it and I think we should help them. You're bringing a strategic opportunity that addresses an issue for the organization and at the same time has a wonderful contribution that it's making in the world.
That's a very sound approach to take, because when we're passionate about something, it's so easy to get excited about it and be enthusiastic, but that enthusiasm isn't always going to carry over to everyone, right? So we do need to present it in a way that's going to outline those benefits and show that it doesn't align. And when preparing to present a project of this level, what prep work should be done ahead of time?
So again, I think it really is part of what demonstrates respect and honors someone's time when you're meeting with them is that you've actually done your homework. So not only does it help that person that you're pitching the idea to in the organization, it makes their decision making easier because you've already laid out all the reasons why this makes sense. But it also is respectful of them, because you're not wasting their time with them having to connect the dots of, that's a really lovely idea, I would like to help you. How could we make sense of that? You have done that thinking for them. So I think there's an element of the preparation that is about first tuning into the audience of, who am I speaking to? What are they struggling with? What have I seen them talking about lately? Or if I look at if each month they're doing a bit of an update for the team and you've seen consistently they're raising an issue that they're not cracking and not being able to find a solution to. Focus in first on the audience of who you are actually presenting the idea to. Weave in specific pieces for them. And then, as I said previously, show the respect and desire to support the organization as a whole by connecting the ideas back to the strategy. I think if you do that well at the individual level and the organizational level, then what it allows you to do is to also be far more relaxed and confident in the way you're presenting the idea. Because if you think about the shift, I mentioned power dynamics earlier, and if you think about the shift that occurs in a conversation when it moves from you nervously going in to someone more senior at the organization and asking them if they could help you and if there could be an opportunity to support this wonderful cause that you care about, or to set up a project that you're passionate about. That dynamic is you feeling a bit nervous and anxious, all the power in their hands, and you're acting as if you bring nothing to the table. And the piece of this kind of interaction that is actually really good practice for us as we're wanting to become better leaders ourselves and from an employee perspective, progress through an organization is preparing well for this type of conversation where you're pitching a win-win opportunity actually allows you to have to reflect and honor yourself as well and say, so what do I bring to this? How could I add value? And when you come to a conversation that you demonstrate, you understand and have shown respect for that person and the organization and have connected this suggestion to what they care about, but then you've also really clearly laid out the value you add and how you're going to help them achieve their goals, that power dynamic completely shifts. You're now not nervous and anxious. You're now coming to them with a solution to their problem or a potential way for them to get a gain that they would like to have and get a win. They will be less defensive and, ready to say no to because they think everyone's coming asking for something. And you will be more confident in the process. So I think they would be the three pieces of prep that I would do in terms of tune into the audience of the people that you're actually pitching to, connect it to the business, and then be very clear on what you bring and don't engage with it in a way where you are asking for help. Engage with it in a way where you are offering a solution.
I think that's a great approach. And, we're also busy and our time is already stretched so thin these days. So beyond increasing support for a cause, how does introducing this sort of project help the employee themselves professionally grow, do you think?
So again, I think if we go back to the idea that when we are able to bring different things that had previously felt like they had to operate in unique boxes, never to meet, when we bring them together, it actually is a beautiful response to that challenge that you mentioned, that we all are pulled in so many directions. There's not enough hours in the day to do all the things we care about. If you start to bring things back together and say, how would I have some of the sense of contribution, meaning, purpose brought into my workday so that when I do go home, I'm not feeling like, oh, okay, now I do have to have all of these family responsibilities. I've got practical things. I want to give time and effort to the people I love, but I'm not feeling I've had the meaning and purpose in that massive day at work. So I also have to squeeze that in. I think the approach of bringing them back together addresses the lack of time, and it actually makes our work, and the reality is most of us spend the bulk of our time in a work context. If you can make that more meaningful and purposeful, that is actually a far more sustainable way to operate in your life. And I think for anyone listening, the piece to be conscious of, if we go back to thinking of when we talk about contribution or doing good, we can often think of that in a very narrow sense. I want to encourage you to figure out, what does doing good or contribution mean for you personally? Because it does look different for all of us. And part of what will allow us to have rich, diverse, and very innovative organizations, because again, if we're honest with ourselves about where innovation comes in, it's when we're able to have different perspectives, different experiences and worldviews coming together, and two things that were not previously connected. Oh, wow, if we bring them together, what does that look like? So all of those types of things will happen more in organizations where people are bringing their whole self to work, and that will look different. So in no sense do I want to be suggesting that everyone has to care about the same thing, or it's all about how do you connect a contribution to a charity or a nonprofit to your organization. It may be that actually your passion is about support and wellbeing services for your fellow employees, and how do we actually do that within the organization. It may be that what you care about is nutrition or exercise, and so you start groups at work that go for walks together at lunch, or that it doesn't have to be about giving a donation or your time away to an external cause. It's about finding what does purpose and fulfillment mean for you and how would you connect it into the organization. Because any of those examples I just gave, even things that might seem like, well, how is good nutrition or well-being or physical health connected to my organization? We're in financial services. It is connected because any executive, manager, owner, director who is thinking about and understanding what makes the business work and consistently deliver with the quality and standards they want will understand that if you have exhausted, stressed employees who are not moving enough, who have aching necks and backs because they sit all day and don't move, that has consequences for what is actually being delivered to your customers or how productive your team are. So there are ways to connect every kind of topic that you may be interested in back to how it benefits the organization. So I think it's about thinking bigger than we typically do when we use that word good or contribution.
And are there ways that leaders can use their employees' passions and interests as a tool to help motivate and inspire and even drive further innovation?
Absolutely. There's actually a lot of research that talks about the benefits that come from organizations where the employees feel a sense of purpose and can actually very clearly connect the work they do, even down to the level of quite simple tasks, how they can connect it to what the organization is trying to achieve as a whole. That sense of purpose and your work being meaningful doesn't have to be all about massive world issues of drinking water or reducing poverty. As humans, we want to feel that sense of contribution, and it can be on very tactical things or very big picture things. So for leaders to actually take the time to not just present to your team, here's our strategy or here's our focus areas for this quarter or this year, but to think about the people in your team. This comes back to, again, flipping what I said before. When someone's going to their boss to pitch an idea, they're having to tune into the audience. As a leader, we should be tuning in to those people that are working for us and understanding them. So listening to, asking questions, being curious. What are the things that are troubling or feeling exciting for your employees? And how do you more intentionally ensure you're connecting your organizational strategy back to things they care about and making it clear and explicit how valuable and important their contribution is to allow the achievement of the overarching goals? So I think, again, whichever way you're looking at it, if you're in the position as a leader in your organization, then you're trying to figure out the connection between your organizational strategy and what your employees and team care about and create a win-win for them. If you're an employee trying to create the win-win the other way, you're doing the same thing. This comes back to that aspect of all of this is about understanding the nuance and complexity of what it is to be a human and then being respectful of other people in the way you interact. Because the more you get that reputation as someone who's trying to create a win-win and not just demanding other people do what you say or wanting other people to care about what you care about, you will have a much better reputation in the organization and people will come to you wanting to work with you or for you because that reputation will precede you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And before I let you go, I'd like to ask you, are there any examples that come to mind of projects that you've seen implemented in organizations that you've just really been blown away by?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because to your point that you were just saying a moment ago, one of the bits that's fascinating is each of us understanding the position that we're in and the best use of our time at that level. So often for leaders, that question of where should they spend their time or effort is a tricky one because they have so many demands coming at them. And what I encourage other people in an organization to realize is once that broader big strategy or focus for the organization has been set, it's actually amazing for a leadership team or an executive if you come in and offer to drill that down to levels of detail and practicality that they don't have the time or scope to be doing. So one organisation that I've worked with here in Victoria, there was actually a woman who was more of the office manager, and she was passionate about a local organisation that was running a food shelter, providing meals for people who were struggling. And as she worked for an organisation that was in the food area, so they were growing a lot of vegetables but at a massive scale, she was able to set up and use her time and contacts and effort to set up these beautiful overlaps between food that was otherwise produce that was otherwise going to be wasted, and taking that as the base supply for this organisation to be making those meals. But then more than that, she encouraged the organisation for people that worked there when they were having their own break to go and serve lunch because it was nearby this organisation. And that project has been going on for over a decade now, and is the piece that gets told at, their big Christmas party or their annual events. Everyone's sense of now connection to that community where their business operates. They're a very practical, easy way for them to feel they've made a difference. And in the process, the organisation has seen employees' happiness and connection improve. They've reduced waste, which otherwise you're paying to dispose of. And I think that is a really simple example of someone connecting local community to what they care about, and an opportunity that actually for the business is not only you're not asking them to give or lose money, you're solving a problem and adding a benefit. So I think that is probably the most natural example of how this can play out. And again, not having to be complicated or on a massive scale, but actually being deeply meaningful for the people within that organisation and the people that benefited from it.
No, I love that example. Oh, what a great initiative. I mean, so it was the office manager. So it really shows you that anyone at any level or position within the organization really can have such a deep-seated impact.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Bessi, thank you again for being with us today. It was such a pleasure speaking with you again.
Yes, my pleasure. It was great, and very happy to, as people listen and want to comment or ask questions, I will definitely be willing to jump in and chat as needed.
All right, thank you so much. We might take you up on that as the comments start coming in. All right, well, thank you, Bessi, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us. We release 2 episodes a month available to watch on YouTube, and you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite streaming services. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe today, and follow along with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening. The Women's Leadership Today podcast is just one feature of the Women's Leadership Today community. We empower women to advance in their career through targeted professional development learning experiences and resources, such as live and on-demand courses, customized training solutions, up-to-date publications, and more. Visit womensleadershiptoday.com to join our community and take your career to the next level. Together, we can empower women everywhere to lead, innovate, and inspire change.